I'm Todd Jones, recovering from 30 years as a sports writer. Thanks for joining me as I sit down with some of the best sports writers of our time who knew the greatest athletes and coaches and experienced firsthand some of the biggest sports moments of the past half century. We'll share stories behind the stories, some we've only told each other. Pull up a seat on Press Box Access. Mark Purdy had a big influence on my own career as a sports writer, and so I'm excited that he's appearing on this show. And you're lucky too, because in Mark Purdy, you'll be hearing from one of America's best sports writers. And he's a great guy. Mark is a fixture in Bay Area sports. He spent 33 of his 43-year career writing columns for the San Jose Mercury News before his retirement in 2017. Bill Walsh, Joe Montana, Barry Bonds. Mark will tell us about them. And he'll put us in that tiny arena on the night of the Miracle on Ice. Hey, Mark, how you doing? Thanks so much for being on the show.
I'm at the top of my game, Todd. I'm locked in. I'm dialed in. I've already had way too much caffeine today.
That does not surprise me as an ex-sports writer.
But thank you for asking.
Hey, I'm going to cut right to the chase here. I'm going to tell you something in all honesty. You changed my life, Mark Purdy.
Oh, wow.
It's either a blame or it's a credit.
All right. My face is already getting red, but go ahead.
This is audio. Nobody sees your red face.
How did this occur?
I'm going to tell you this. I grew up in Newport, Kentucky, right across the river from Cincinnati.
Yes.
And when I was in high school, you were working for the Cincinnati Enquirer, and I would read your columns, and I would think to myself, now that's a job I wouldn't mind doing. I like to write. I like sports. And geez, this writer, he's even got a young face. He looks kind of almost like my age. Maybe I'll be a sports writer. And in all seriousness, seeing you, reading you, that just changed the way I thought about what I want to do with my ability to write. And I think I told you that years ago and you got embarrassed, but I wanted to say it again right at the start. Mark Purdy, thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks. I hope it turned out pretty good for you. I've enjoyed your work over the years. I think every sports writer probably had somebody that they read as a kid that, they ended up trying to emulate. For me, I grew up in Salina, Ohio, which is a real small town up on the Ohio-Indiana border by Fort Wayne. And, the sports editor of my hometown paper, Bob Shraluka, who's still alive. And
wow.
The last time I was home, I went over to he lives in Decatur, Indiana, and I went over and visited him just to tell him thank you. One thing about our profession that's always been, I must be part of the culture, Todd, is like people, guys trying to help other guys when they're young. There are a few screwheads out there, but I've always tried to be grateful for the guys that helped me, right on and up to, I did a stint at the Los Angeles Times. And, ended up sitting next to the press box to Jim Murray for,
wow.
The Rose Bowl or, certain other events. And I'm thinking, this is the guy this was the guy, right? And when I left the LA Times to go back to Cincinnati to write the column, I said, well, here's my chance, right? I said, Jim, would you have, 10 minutes, 15 minutes to talk about writing columns? Couldn't have been nicer. Gave me pieces of advice I carried with me through that whole career. So I appreciated that. And thank you for saying that. We were lucky guys, I think, to be writing sports journalism when we did.
You also had some journalism advice from, of all people, Sparky Anderson.
Oh, yeah. That story.
I think you were 21 years old and you show up at the Reds game to interview 20. Sparky.
So Bucky Albers was the Reds beat writer. And they as part of your summer internship, you would accompany the Reds beat writer to, see how he did his job and maybe do a sidebar or whatever.
Run quotes or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, so this was the first time I'd been there, and I was probably 20 years old, and or 21, probably 20. Anyway, so it's a twilight doubleheader. People may not be familiar with that concept now, but they used to play twilight doubleheaders. It would start at like 5 o'clock, and they play 2 games. And it was against the Mets. And so we get there, or middle of the afternoon, and Bucky introduces me to Sparky before the game. This is Mark Purdy, our intern. Hi, and the doubleheader proceeds, and my job is basically to run quotes for Bucky, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
he's upstairs writing on deadline.
So now it's like late at night after the second game, or second game's ending. The Reds blow a lead. They are ahead, and their reliever, a guy named Jim McLaughlin, is the reliever, and he blows the save, and It's like the third save in the row he's blown, and but Bucky's like, right in the running and finish. He goes like,
hey, let's send a kid down there and get some quotes.
Yeah. He says, I'm not going to be able to go down. So you go down and ask Sparky how long can he possibly stick with McLaughlin as the closer, and and a couple other questions, right? So it's now late, right? And I go down there and I walk into Sparky's office, and I'm the only guy, right? Because everybody's writing about the first game, right? Or they're on deadline, and they don't, they're just going to wrap up the second game in a 4 paragraphs or something.
You're the Grim Reaper showing up.
But I'm the guy walking in, this kid walking in, and Sparky's behind his desk, and he's, looking kind of grumpy. And I walk in and say, hi, Sparky, hi, I'm Mark Purdy. I met you before the game. Yeah. What do you got? And I go, well, I hate to ask you this question, but, how long can you that's McLaughlin's third blown save, and how long can you really stick with him as your closer? And Sparky's behind his desk, and he stands up, and he points at me, and he goes, let me tell you something, young man.
Uh-oh.
And I'm ready to, like, oh boy, here it comes. He goes, don't you ever apologize for asking a question like that.
Wow.
That's your job. If you're going to make it in this business, you've got to learn to ask that question and not apologize for it, because it's my job to answer that question, and it's your job to ask it.
Well, Sparky was telling you not to apologize for asking questions, and I wanted to ask you a question, Mark Purdy. Do you believe in miracles?
Well, that's, people, and probably they ask you this question too, what's the most exciting event you ever covered? And wow, how lucky was I, in 1980.
Winter Olympics, Lake Placid, New York.
First Olympics I covered. My eyes are wide open. I go there, and I end up covering that Olympic hockey tournament that includes the Miracle on Ice game. Still the most exciting thing I've ever covered. Being that, have you ever been there, Todd?
No, I want you to tell us about that, because, most of us have not been to Lake Placid.
Yeah.
And so you're there the night that America upsets the Russians 4-3. And it was not for the gold medal. People think it was the gold medal. It was the semifinals.
Right.
And actually, it was on tape delay.
Right.
It wasn't even live television.
Right, which I don't know that I knew that at the time. You're there.
Right.
And you're covering it. I don't think people, people have seen the movie, and I don't think people really understand just how isolated and how small that place was, and how
Lake Placid.
What a bubble you were in. So you didn't really quite you sort of knew the way the outside world was looking at it, but you're really, it's a very small number of people. It's a small arena. It's a small.
Yeah, how big was the arena? Tell us about the arena being in there.
It was like a big high school gym with a hockey rink inside.
Yeah, like 8,500 seats or something.
Yeah, probably seated like 8,000 people, maybe.
8,000. Like, that's not even a big place.
Bleacher seats. And I remember we sat up in the bleachers, and like, it wasn't really a balcony. It was just kind of the extension of the lower bowl, but there was a walkway. And I remember David Israel of the Chicago Tribune before stood up and goes like, so I want everybody to know, just in this instance, it's okay to cheer in the press box. But which everybody laughed and nobody cheered anyway, but we were just so stunned. And then what's occurring. Anyway, it's a one stoplight town. And, it's cold, and they're really not, if you could get there, you could get in to see the game, because it was hard to get to. And so, but if you got there, there were tickets around, right? Because there were just, so the people in there were really, I don't know, everybody was so psyched. Because
the Russians were just a machine. They were pros.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the setup is, the Soviet Union was the greatest hockey team in the world. And remember, they could not have their players play in the NHL. So nobody's expecting the USA to do anything but kind of show up and put up a good fight. And I remember, before that week, but the USA team is good and they're winning. And they were the Olympic Village was later converted. It was built so that it could be converted to a prison afterwards.
Oh, nice.
May still be a prison there. I don't know.
Nice.
And there was, so it was that, and then they set up like trailers on there, So I remember going out there, yeah, and just again the access. Again, I remember going out and talking to these guys, they were leaning up against the portable trailers or whatever, and talking to them, and Jim Craig, the goalie, is saying, well, I just want to, try to do what I always do and, see the puck and stop the puck. And I'm going like, he better be ready to eat a lot of rubber. And I'm, it's going to be a romp. Soviets are going to roll. Well, to much to our surprise, of course, the USA hangs in there. And holy crap, it's like, I think Mike Eruzione scores a go-ahead goal with like 10 minutes to go.
10 minutes to go, right. What was that like when he scored?
When he scored, the building is just going nuts, and we're going, holy crap, this is, it was. There was a lot of dramatics. The Soviet coach, who it turns out later, as Sergei Makarov told me, and Igor Larionov, and some of these other guys told me, they really hated their coach.
Mm-hmm.
They really, that was part of the dynamic of this. He was just a taskmaster, bad guy, and he pulls the goalie, their great goalie. So the place is going nuts, and Todd, those last 8-10 minutes where it seemed like they took 2 hours. Right. I later watched the whole game on video, and it really was. There weren't many whistles. It was really like 8 minits, But we're there like, holy crap, and
you really just kept shooting.
Oh yeah, it was hard. I'm 27, 28 years old, and like, this is amazing, and not realizing that 40 years later, that's still the most exciting thing I've ever witnessed. And then boom, it's over. We don't hear Al Michaels say, the miracles, but
do you believe in miracles?
Yeah. But holy shit, they did it. And now we got to write this, right?
Yeah. So what was the feeling there?
Well, the press conferences were on the arena is still right next door to Lake Placid High School. And the working room was the high school gym.
Really? That was the press center?
We were writing that was the press room, and we were writing on typewriters at that time. and feeding it into telecopiers, and the press interviews were in the auditorium, the school auditorium. And these guys come in and they're late, where it's like, and then we go back into the gym, and I'm pounding, and I had gotten to know a couple of the Soviet writers in that era. The Soviet journalists, they basically had to write what the government told them. And so in the gym there, I run across this guy and said, so what are you going to write, after this? And he says, I have to talk to my editor, right? And then so I saw him then like later that night. I said, so what did your editor tell you, right? President Carter ordered the USA to win, and they've told the officials, they had to make sure the USA would win, So that was the Soviet spin on the story.
Well, you were very fortunate to be there. I mean, it's really the sports moment of American history, the last 50 years, and you were there to chronicle it. You had great fortune. And then 4 years later, you had great timing. You move out to California, to the Bay Area, just when the 49ers, the San Francisco 49ers dynasty is really in flight. That must have been feeling fortunate, too, to show up. And there's Bill Walsh, the coach, and there's Joe Montana, the quarterback, and Jerry Rice. And I'm like, so all of a sudden you're covering one of the great dynasties in the NFL history. Yeah,
that was like traveling with the Beatles every week, Todd. I mean, they go to the hotels and, people would be, I remember, one hotel in those days, you would stay at the same hotel as a team. And walking, and the team would all be in one wing and it'd be heavily guarded. But we're walking down a hall and there's these like 5 people sitting in the hallway. What are you doing? Well, Joe Montana might walk back here. We're going to get an autograph. And we're like, well, I got news for you. Joe Montana is not going to walk down this hall. Right? It's not going to happen. You guys can, God love you, but you go home. And I go out to eat, have some drink, come back. They're still sitting in the hall. It was just, that was a beloved team. And then, getting to know those guys. See, I'd known Bill Walsh because he had been an assistant on the Bengals staff to Paul Brown, right?
Right.
And,
8 years he was in Cincinnati.
Yes,
People
and he
forget that.
Yeah, he was the offensive coordinator there, and he got passed over for the head coaching job. A guy named Tiger
Johnson
got the job instead, and Bill carried that chip on his shoulder the rest of his life. He thought Paul Brown had dissed him, and that in terms of, first of all, not appointing him head coach, but also there had been other jobs that people had called Paul Brown about Bill Walsh, and Paul had. I talked to Mike Brown, Paul's son, about this later, and I said, what was it all about? He says, well, we didn't, tell people not to hire him. We just said, this guy's kind of flaky. He's a flaky guy. He's from California. He's kind of flaky guy. And you know what? Bill was flaky. He was also brilliant, right?
Yeah. So 6 years after he got passed over for the Cincinnati job, he takes the Niners to the Super Bowl, and they play Cincinnati.
And they beat the Bengals. He beat the Bengals twice.
Mm-hmm.
He beat the Bengals in
81 and 89.
89, twice he beats the Bengals. And he and I would talk about Paul Brown and how fortunate were all of us, right, to interact with that guy, because he kind of invented modern pro football. But to Bill's view, it was like the guy that always had screwed me out of getting an NFL head job.
Do you really think that drove him a lot? Do you think that drove Walsh?
Yeah, yes. I don't know what percentage of that. I mean, Bill was brilliant and quirky and flaky.
So give us an example of
Well, he was a brilliant guy, but he was a very insecure guy. He grew up on the east side of the Bay here in the San Francisco Bay Area, in a town called Fremont, and which is the blue collar side of the Bay. He went to San Jose State, which is the big state school here, but it's not Stanford, it's not Cal, and but Bill liked to think of himself as a sophisticated guy, and he was in many ways. But he always kind of carried that, I'm just a guy from Fremont and San Jose State, and out to prove the world, I'm not just a guy from San Jose State. And so he was very, very conscious of his image, and the guys who worked for him just said, like, if after a loss, you couldn't talk to him. He just, and I saw some of that. I remember they lost a game in Arizona on a Monday night, and I went in the coach's office afterwards, and he was like just drained white and just had his hands in his hands. And this is after like he's won Super Bowls, right?
Right.
But
right.
he was just always insecure. And I think, some of it might stem from the, being passed over by Paul Brown, right? I mean, like, it was always in the back of his head. So about 2 months, my last conversation with him was about 2 months before he died. Okay, he had leukemia, and we're together, and I'm actually interviewing him about about San Jose State. And at the end of it, I close my notebook and say, Bill, just want to say, over the years, you've always been, very open and honest with me, and I appreciate that. And in fact, we've had a good professional relationship, means a lot to me, blah, 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 blah. And he goes and he looks at me, he's like, I'm not dying today. And I said, I know you're not dying today, but I just wanted to say that, I said, I go back all the way to Paul Brown, and then he starts talking about Paul Brown again. And I said, well, did Paul ever apologize to you for passing you over? Did you, And he goes, no, he never did. He goes, well, he did sort of. I said, what do you mean? Well, after Bill resigned from the 49ers, he spent some time as an NBC analyst, very briefly. He didn't like it, but
right.
And so at one point, they asked him to go interview Paul Brown. Okay. It's I don't know, it might have been a playoff game or something.
That must have been interesting.
So, yes. So they set it up. Paul Brown is being interviewed by Bill. And the interview's concluded. And I don't know what they're taught, what the interview was. It was about the game and Paul and the Bengals and whatever. But they never bring up topic A, right? It's like, why the hell did you pass me over for that job, right?
That's not an elephant. That's a herd of elephants.
But Bill never brings it up. But Bill tells me, so the interview's over. And Bill starts walking out of the room, and Paul stops and points at him and says, Bill, I made a mistake when I didn't hire you.
Wow.
And Bill, I said, what'd you say? He says, well, Bill, I told him, look, Paul, it's okay. Everything turned out okay, you know? And I said, well, that's an apology. And he looks at me, he was like, not a real apology, you know? I said,
Wow.
well, it's kind of, I
deep.
said, did it mean anything to you that he said that? And he paused, and Bill says, yeah, you know what, though, it did mean something. It did mean something.
Tell us about Montana. You know, when I think about Joe Montana, here's one thing that comes to mind for me is I can't name you one quote ever uttered by Joe Montana.
Yeah.
And I mean that as a tribute to him.
Oh, no, well, first of all, he didn't care about any of that stuff, you know. He actually was very available for quotes. It's just, you know, quoteless Joe. But he would, you know what he would do? You'd say, what happened on that interception? And he would like just explain, well, you know, the X receiver went this way, and you know, so detailed in the terminology you couldn't really use the quote, right? But he would be open to explaining what happened. And there was one good quote he gave me once about, because I was talking to him once about you know, how difficult it is to play quarterback in the NFL, and how, you know, he developed, you know, his ability to kind of, you know, diagnose these things under really tense, you know, he was the master of the 2-minute drill and all that, you know. And he said, you know, it's not as hard as, at least for him, as you think. He says, it's like when you don't think about this when you're driving a car a lot. Let's say you're a driver and you come to a busy intersection, and you have to navigate that intersection. I'm paraphrasing what he said, you know. Well, like, right. He says, you know, you come and there's a car over here to your right. There's a car coming straight ahead at you. There's another car that may or may not stop coming this way. You want to turn this way. There might be a pedestrian walking across the street, and you process all this in you know, seconds, right, to make your decision about where to steer the car and push the accelerator. It's like that. It's like, you know, if you do it often, you know, practice it and all that. It's like that when you're playing quarterback.
Yeah, but when you're driving a car, you don't have these monsters trying to rip your head
off. That's one difference. But you might have a truck bearing down on you. But yeah. So, you know,
that's an interesting metaphor. I never heard of it.
I'm sure he said it in such a detailed and whatever way that I couldn't exactly quote it word for word, because he was just not that kind of guy. But he was, you know, that craziness of him and Steve Young, both who I thought I had pretty good relationships with. It got so nuts, Todd, that, you know, I guess I can tell this now, you know, like Joe, and I wasn't, you know, I was a columnist. I would show up twice a week there, right? Not every day like the guys, but I got to know those guys. And I remember Joe and his wife had a kid right about the same time we did, and we talk about the babies and all that. But Joe would like pull me aside, you know, after practice. And again, this would never happen now, right? And say, you know what Steve did? Steve did this. And then like the next day, Steve would say, Mark, you know what Joe's telling people I did? You know?
Wow, sounds like high school or something.
Yeah, I'm playing dumb, right? Oh no, you know. And I think I still don't think those guys are real close, but I think they kind of come to terms with what that was all about. And it was really about Bill. We are back to Bill Walsh again. Bill was playing them against each other because he thought it would make both of them better with that dynamic.
Coming up on 5 Minute News, I'm Anthony Davis. You might think it's partisan because maybe it's critical of one side or the other, but it's not. It's just the truth. And I think that's also something that's kind of unusual for Americans listening to the radio or to podcasts, because the news landscape in the States has been so partisan for so many decades. So 5 Minute News is verified, truthful, independent, unbiased, and essential world news daily.
Well, those great 49er teams played in one of the most god-awful places that I've ever covered a game in, and that's Candlestick Park. Just a dump of a stadium. Yeah. And you were in that stadium in 1989 when of all things we had the A's and the Giants, the Bay Series, the A's and the Giants in the World Series. It's just before Game 3 is going to begin. You're sitting. Where were you sitting?
I was in the Bob Hunter talked about the auxiliary press boxes, and even though I was working a local, the press box, baseball press box at Candlestick was so tiny, and so we were in the upper deck, basically in the stands with some tables set up. You've been there, I can remember who I was standing next to. The great Gary Noon from the Dayton. There's another Dayton guy. And
it's always Dayton.
No, so I'm standing next to Gary Noon. It's like 8 minutes before the, national anthem or whatever. And yeah, the thing started. The whole stadium starts shaking. And Gary looks at me and goes like, "What? What?" I said, "It's an earthquake. Don't worry."
Don't worry.
Well, no, it'll be over in a second or two, right? Those are the experiences I'd had with earthquakes here. This one is not over in a second. It goes on and it goes on and it's gone. And I look up, and I remember looking up to my left to where the football press box was, way higher up. And the windows in the football press box are like, jello. They're like, bubbling in and out. But I remember thinking in my head, if those windows start popping out, because the place is full, and I'm going all these calculations. If those windows pop out and this place is full, and we're in trouble. We're in real trouble. And just about then, after 12, 15 seconds, it does stop. And the weirdest thing, Todd, was, so it stops, and the immediate reaction from the crowd is this lusty cheer. Yeah, well, it's the Bay Area. Of course,
it's cool, man.
Think about the two Bay Area teams are playing in this stadium, and they have an earthquake right before the two Bay Area teams. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a mystical guy, but think about that. The whole season comes down to this, and they have this earthquake. And Gary's, now the color's coming back to Gary's face and probably mine. And we go down to the field, and the players are just milling around. And, what's going on? The power's out. Finally, after 20 minutes or so, they said, "Well, we're not playing this game, right?" And I had walked around the stands. There was like a chunk of concrete that fell down in the right field. If you remember, there was a guy. I don't remember this seeing into my eye, but I know I saw a video of it later. Some guy is up repairing a light bulb on the light tower as this. He's hanging on to light towers. It's swaying back and forth. So finally they say it's off. So I go to down by the Giants. Were you over at Candlestick? You know where those locker rooms were along the field?
Oh yeah.
The players are, and so the players are told, like, look, the game's off. You guys should go home, but you better get out of here before the crowd, disperses. So the players are in their uniforms, Todd, and they're going out to the players' parking lot in their uniforms with their families. And I'm talking to some of them, and I remember Robbie Thompson was the second baseman, and he's standing there and he's just telling me what it's like and, what his thoughts are or whatever, what his experience was. Willie Mays had been in the equipment manager's office and comes out, and he was like, "I've never been scared in this ballpark before." They were great quotes. And some fan comes up to Robbie Thompson and says, "Can I have your autograph?"
No.
And then Robbie Thompson just looks at them and like, we just had an earthquake, right?
Oh, God.
I'm trying to get out here with my family, right? But fans are always going to be fans, right? It was an unforgettable night. And I always say Candlestick is my favorite ballpark, even though it's the shittiest ball, because it held up during the earthquake time. Maximum weight on those girders, maximum weight. House is full, biggest earthquake we have in the Bay Area in my lifetime. And the thing held up, so how can I say otherwise?
I was going to say that the fact that the Candlestick Park did not fall to the ground and really have a horrible, horrible tragedy is amazing, because I had been in there and that place was awful.
It was horrible. I don't, some people say they miss it. They're lying.
Nobody
awful.
misses the
we have this beautiful new ballpark here.
Well, yeah, I want to, the Giants went into a much, much nicer ballpark sitting right there on the water, and you have become part of the legend of the San Francisco Giants Park because you are the man, And I think Leonard Coppett at the Oakland Tribune played a role in this too. But you guys, you came up with this idea that beyond right field, the water should be named after Willie McCovey, right? Tell us about how you came up with that.
Well, I'll tell you the short version. For people to know, Willie McCovey, is a great Hall of Fame hitter, hit 521 home runs, and was a more beloved player here in the Bay Area than Willie Mays, who people here thought came from New York and was, McCovey was their own. He'd grown up as a San Francisco Giant, and so they're building a new ballpark. It's announced that they're going to build a statue of Willie Mays on the plaza behind home plate. And the address of the ballpark is going to be 25 Willie Mays Plaza, and they're also, so in the pre-opening hype, they're talking, that's part of it, and also you're going to be able to hit home runs into the Bay, and so again, this is how things fall together. So like the year before that, they're building the ballpark. The ballpark's under construction. I'm with my kid. We're going to the X Games, which are at Pier 39, and we're driving over the Lefty O'Doul Bridge, and I look down, and on that body of water, I'm going like, well, that's not the Bay. I don't know what that is. It's like this inlet. I don't know what it is, but it's not the Bay. I'm going to call BS on the Giants for that. And so the next day, I'm at the ballpark, and the Giants are having some sort of ceremony honoring one of their playoff teams or something that McCovey had played on, and they have all the players there, but McCovey's not there. And I'm going, where's McCovey? Well, he's not feeling great. He had some income tax problems and gotten in trouble for that. He's kind of ashamed of that. And he's all that. So, well, that's really a shame because he's, part of this lore of this team. And so then, in the back of my mind, I'm remembering this thing with the water that my son and I had driven over. And so now we're in the lunchroom, and I'm sitting there with a couple of guys and Leonard Coppett, who you mentioned. And I'm going like, hey, is this the craziest idea? But, if they're going to name the home plate thing after Mays, they ought to do something with McCovey. They ought to put McCovey's name on that water out there. And they could call it McCovey River, McCovey Run, McCovey something. And Leonard says, McCovey Cove. It's alliterative, right? I'm going like, you're right, McCovey Cove. So I end up writing.
Teamwork. You and Leonard working together.
But I end up writing the column like, this is what should happen. And it's too bad I benched. Oh, and I went and talked to JT Snow, the first baseman of the Giants at that time. I said, what do you know about Willie McCovey? I don't know a lot about him. I know numbers, but there was a different generation, right? And
right.
Here's another reason, so that people will remember who Willie McCovey was. And when kids come to the ballpark and their parents tell them who Willie McCovey was, and also Willie McCovey, great left-handed hitter. The ball's going over the right field wall would fall in that water, right? And it makes sense. It all just fit. So I write this column saying, this is what the Giants ought to do and San Francisco ought to do. They ought to name this McCovey Cove. And nothing happens. The column gets no response. Right? No. Except I get a phone call from Willie McCovey, or his agent, and says, McCovey wants to have lunch with you. So, okay, so your policy is probably the same as mine. Hall of Famer wants to have lunch with you. You go have lunch with a Hall of Famer, right?
Oh, yeah, I think so. That's a good call.
We met up at the country club he belonged to. And I promised I would never share everything about that lunch, but it was really special. And I'm wondering, like, is he pissed off about this idea? You never know with these guys, right? You don't know what. Mm-hmm. So I wrote again, and, we got a map and showed people where it was. And lo and behold, like after the second or third column, Larry Barrow, the Giants, when the executive comes up, you know what? I think we're just going to do that. I think we're going to name it McCovey Cove. And so they did, and it was. I've had a lot of bad ideas in my life, but that was a good one, and it makes me happy when I. And the bonus, Todd, was it reconnected McCovey to the organization. All of a sudden he would show up at the ballpark a lot more. It got him back involved with the Giants, and he became a beloved kind of fixture on the ballpark, and that made me so happy. And he and I kind of developed a nice relationship out of that, which led to one of my favorite little moments in my career, which is the Giants are having the All-Star game in whatever year it was there, and they're having the home run hitting contest, and McCovey's made the honorary captain of that, right? Because
Yeah, I think it's 2007.
Okay, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I asked McCovey, can I just follow you around that night? He says, yeah, sure. So I'm following around that night. And so this is like an hour or so before the home run hitting contest. And we end up in the equipment manager's office. Mike Murphy's the guy's name. So, and guess who? So it's this office, this kind of small office of the equipment manager, where a lot of players just like to hang out because Mike Murphy's a great guy, right? It's me. It's Willie McCovey. It's Frank Robinson. It's Willie Mays.
Wow.
and the equipment manager. And I'm like, in this room, I totaled it up, and it was like a total of 1,767 home runs in that room or whatever. And I'm like, and me. And I'm like, well, this is, who doesn't belong, right? And I just sat back, and for like 15, 20 minutes, those guys just started, telling stories. And I'm thinking, what a lucky SOB I am, right?
Right.
This, this idea I had about McCovey Cove ends up, here I am in this room with these three of the greatest home run hitters of all time. And, and they're trusting me to, if I'm with McCovey, I'm good. Right. And that was a good column.
Well, before we turn our attention away from baseball and wrap this up, I wanted to ask you about one guy who seemed to launch a lot of baseballs out into McCovey Cove, and that's Barry Bonds.
He was not friendly with the media. We all know that. And my attitude toward him was, as I told him, like, I get paid the same whether you MF me or whether, you want to answer my questions. And so it's okay, just, let me know if you're available, fine. If you're not, fine. But let's try to keep this professional. And,
right.
And sometimes he did, and sometimes he didn't. Todd, to me, I never felt animus toward him. I just felt he's just one of the weirdest guys ever. I never felt sorry for him, but I felt like he was kind of a sad person in this respect. Barry, for some reason, just couldn't. He just couldn't relate to people, not just the media. He couldn't relate to people the way you and I do, or the way an average guy of any color could, like in terms of having a conversation or whatever. It was just, everything was just off, just kind of, and it was that way with his teammates, you could see it in the locker room. First time I really tried to have a conversation with him, and we did have some conversations later, but spring training, 1993, he's joined the Giants. I show up in Scottsdale and introduce myself. I met to him at his locker. Here's who I am. This is what I do. I promise not to bother you unless I really have a question I need answered. If you don't want to answer it, that's okay. Just tell me. But I get paid the same whatever you do. But I think people are really interested in you, obviously. And so I it'd be great if. And today, for the first column, I don't want to bug you that much, but I'd like to write about your time growing up as a little leaguer on the peninsula. And, everybody thinks Michael Jordan was this great natural athlete when he did have natural athletics, but as a kid, he would go from playground to playground, finding the best game. He was obsessed, right? And that's one reason he became a great player. I said, as a kid, you must have really been into baseball and, loved playing games. So if you could give me the name of your little league coach or something that I could call and maybe get, have some stories about that,
What'd he say?
He pauses. He looks at me. He goes like, "Yeah, I'll give you the name. I'll give you his fucking name. He's 6 feet under the fucking ground." He turns around, pivots, and walks away back, toward the training room.
That was your first interaction.
Yeah, and I look, and the guy sitting at the next locker, Matt Williams,
third baseman, yeah,
looks up at me and goes, "Better get used to it. That's our new outfielder." That's our new outfielder. And I'm thinking, well, it turned out the guy wasn't dead, right?
Yeah.
But he just liked to. He just didn't. He couldn't. One time he's we're all at the All-Star game in Cleveland, Todd, and he does this really nice thing. He's doing something for bone marrow donation for there's this kid from Oakland that's there.
Yeah, good story. Yeah, he's doing a good deed.
Thing, and he's promoting it. And so after that presser's over, he goes back to the National League locker room, and he's the only guy there because all the other players are out. Barry never did exercises or anything. So I said, hey, I'd like to ask a few more follow-up questions about that. And he goes, like, you're going to write something nice about me? And I said, well, Barry, my policy is when people do nice things, I do write nice things about them, He goes, well, I said, well, what's so weird about you, Barry? And this is true. There'll be a game where you hit 3 home runs, and the writers will want to come down and talk to you about that. And you say, tell us to F off or whatever, and go talk to some other people. I'm not into it today. I don't want to do, we're going to deal with it today. So we do. We go talk to other people. But then when you strike out 2 times and maybe to end a game or, a playoff game, he had famously,
especially in Pittsburgh, struggled.
Yeah. But then you'll sit and talk for a long time about, I messed up. I let the team down. I just really shouldn't, that was just awful. I really taken it on personally, and I really hate what happened. And you'll go on and talk about that. But then, which is interesting, but then you'll complain like, you guys only write about me when I do bad stuff.
No, it was your fault. Yeah.
Well, if you're talking at length after you do something bad, we're kind of going to write more about that than when you do something good and tell us to go off, right? I don't understand that part of your personality. He goes like, well, you don't know the way I grew up. I said, well, I know a little bit about the way I grew up. Let's talk about it. He goes, oh, no, I'm not going to go there. I said, well, I want to help people understand, why you're that way. He goes, you're going to write whatever you want anyway. I said, well, that's my job. But I want to hear saying, well, you wouldn't really understand. I said, I'm here. I got my notebook. I'm here. Well, nah, I'm not going to go there,
Yeah, I always felt perplexed in my interactions with him when he would come through Cincinnati with the Giants or the Pirates. And I remember one time I went up to him early in the season. He's just sitting in his locker, and I said, I'm just going to go up and ask for a one-on-one, just for the hell of it.
Yeah.
I was kind of curious about what kind of bad response I could get. Well, I got the exact opposite. He starts talking, and he kept talking, and he and I kept talking, and it went on for like 20 minutes. And I realized, I looked over, and the pack of San Francisco writers were all looking over at my
like, who's this guy?
Where I'm standing with him. Basically like, who is this guy? And what I realized is Bonds is just messing with those guys. That's why he's talking to me.
Exactly.
He doesn't know me from Adam. He doesn't care who I am. He wants to mess with those San Francisco writers.
Right.
So he's giving me 20 minutes.
It had to wear him out, Todd. I think, I don't know what I believe it's more energy. You use up more energy. It's harder to be an a-hole than a good guy, because you got to have this thing in your head calculated like that.
And I've always was curious about the idea of what drives these people. And you mentioned it with Bill Walsh and the idea of being overlooked and how he never really let that go. I was always fascinated by what the people who are so great at what they do in athletics, what is it that drives them? And that's what I mean by dealing with Bonds. Everybody knows he was difficult, but I was always wondering, why do you have to make it difficult?
Yeah. And the short answer is he thought he had to be that way to be a great player.
And maybe that's true. Who knows? That's all they owed.
But you know what? He cared a lot about what people thought about him. This thing with the steroids. I think
it's human nature. We all do.
It was whatever people think. No, he cared a lot. I covered every minute of his perjury obstruction of justice trial. And, it came apparent to me through the testimony of all these people, why would Barry even care, right? Whether people cared whether he used steroids or not. He cared because, he was trying to prove that he didn't, right? Mm-hmm. When he did. And, but he wanted, and so they found him guilty of obstruction of justice. He appealed it. I mean, this had to cost, I knew his attorney, this had to cost him into 7 figures, Todd, to appeal this obstruction of justice clause and he got it overturned. So in his mind now, he won. Yeah.
Right. And that's all that mattered in the end, maybe. So
yeah.
I don't know. Well, he wouldn't let us go on the ride with him, but Mark, Purdy, you grew up in Salina, Ohio, population 7,000, and you went into a career 43 years. You traveled to 5 continents, 14 Olympics, more than 30 Super Bowls. We didn't even talk about Super Bowls, really. It's an amazing amount of places and events and people that you covered, the characters. And, you were always great for taking us on a flight. So you never knew as a sports writer where you were going to be or how you were going to get there. But I'll wrap it up with this. I was on another Olympic bus one time, and I think we were in Greece. And I was sitting on the bus sharing a seat with you.
Really?
And not to get too weepy or anything, but I was just thinking to myself, how did some kid from Kentucky end up in Greece doing exactly what he wanted to do because of the guy sitting next to him? And it was a real special moment.
That's really sweet of you to say that. Thank you. We were lucky to be born at the right time, to have the right intersection with the career where we could have moments like that. I am humbled by you saying that. I guess that's all I can say. So, but you held up your own, sir. You're, I still have some clips, some Todd Jones clips somewhere that if I like something.
They come with crayons.
Remember newspapers?
Remember those? They're good kindling, right? They're good kindling.
If somebody wrote something good, I still have.
All right, I'm going to end this love fest before the Border Control of Sports Writers gets rid of us. But thank you in all seriousness for a great career and your friendship, and thank you for taking us on a ride in this episode.
Sure.
Thanks for listening to Pressbox Access. You can find us here with a new episode every other Wednesday. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe and follow us on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast app. We'd love for you to review us. 5 stars would be nice. Follow us on social media. Drop us an email at pressboxaccess@gmail.com. And be sure to spread the word. Everyone is welcomed here. This has been a production of Evergreen Podcast. A special thank you to executive producers Michael D'Aloia and Gerardo Orlando, producer Sarah Wilgrube, and our audio engineer Dave Douglas. I'm your host, Todd Jones. It's closing time. Rock on.
Women's Running Stories, where we explore the intersection between running and life. Because every woman who is committed to a running journey has a story to tell, and this is where you'll find those stories. I am host and producer Cherie Louise Turner. I'm a 53-year-old runner, and together with original music by musician and runner Cormac O'Regan, we bring these inspirational stories to life. Please join us to fuel your adventures.